You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio. Freedom Radio.
Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Progress occurs in the Middle East when everyone knows there's simply no space between the United States and Israel. There is no space between the United States and Israel when it comes to Israel's security.
That, of course, was the Vice President of the United States, Joseph Biden, on the 9th of March. Shortly before we began having laid before not only the American audience but the world a considerable amount of daylight between the United States and Israel. One can argue about whether it was directed at security, namely Israel's security, or whether it was part of some larger diplomatic dance. But my question is, whatever the intention, has the way the Obama administration has been handling our relationship with Israel, I would argue, if not the, certainly one of the most important strategic partnerships we have in the world today, has it been handling it in a way that has greatly increased the possibility of a new conflict that could engulf Israel and indeed greatly affect our interests more generally? And to help answer that question, we've turned to an old friend and colleague, a woman who has been intimately involved in helping educate lots of us, and in particular through the organization of which she is the vice president, the absolutely super Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. She and her colleagues have been instrumental in educating a lot of military men and women about the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship. And I know that we can count on Shoshana Bryen to help us understand, put into context, and make sense of what the Obama administration is doing, if indeed we can make sense of it. So, Shoshana, welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Frank. It's nice to be here.
So here we have the Vice President of the United States saying at one moment, no daylight between us and Israel. And in the ensuing hours and days, weeks now, I guess, shortly, the United States government seemingly being at pains to suggest to the Palestinians on the one hand, the Arabs more generally, the world, that there's lots of daylight. What are we to make of this?
I would make a distinction between real daylight and phony daylight. Phony daylight is things like houses for Jewish people in Israel's capital. They know there is no chance that Israel is going to give up houses for Jewish people in the undivided capital of Israel.
Jerusalem.
That's phony daylight. That was an attempt to say to the Palestinians, we are not one-sided. We will beat up on Israel occasionally. But if you think that there's really any belief in the administration or anywhere else that Israel is not going to keep building houses in its own capital, that's phony daylight. And we know that because the Secretary of State accepted the Netanyahu position that if there was any sort of slowdown in house building on the West Bank, it was not going to relate to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And she accepted that. So that's phony daylight. But more importantly, the Vice President was talking about there being no daylight on the broad issue of Israeli security, and I think he meant Iran. And there is real daylight and dangerous daylight.
Yeah. Tell us, as you see it, Shoshana Bryen of JINSA, how that daylight is manifesting itself and what the implications of it might be if Israel perceives an imminent danger that must be eliminated from an Iranian nuclear weapons program, and the Obama administration declines to recognize it as such.
Well, you've just put your finger on the actual daylight, and that is the priority to which they assign to Iranian nuclear weapons. For the United States, Iran is a problem, a threat, an irritation, but it's not an existential threat. The big problems for the United States are Afghanistan and, most importantly, beyond everything else, Pakistan. If you want to see where the United States military has focused its interest and its attention, it's on Pakistan and the possibility that the civilian government there could collapse. For Israel, there is no threat but Iran. And so the willingness of the United States to engage the Iranian problem is much less than the need for Israel to have the United States engage that problem. And that's real daylight, and that's serious.
Yeah. I very reluctantly quibble with you, but I would worry about other sort of arrays of enemies together constituting, again, a threat to Israel. They've tried repeatedly in the past to eliminate Israel, the Arab neighbors and others. But I certainly agree with you that the prospect of an Iran armed with a nuclear weapon under this regime constitutes a mortal peril to Israel, an existential peril to Israel that surpasses even the kinds of conventional warfare capabilities that others have been. Unfortunately, as you've documented, Shoshana Bryen, at JINSA so well, we ourselves have been contributing to in terms of the military buildup of some of these neighboring and as yet unreconciled states.
Yes, Frank, we're not quibbling.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Okay.
The array of Arab states that are purchasing enormous amounts of Western, specifically U.S. weaponry, does pose a threat to Israel. I think the Israelis have some sense that they can deal with that. Mm-hmm. But when you raise it to the level of a nuclear threat in the hands of the current regime in Iran, that's the kind of threat that I don't see where any country facing that threat can have any level of confidence in their ability to withstand that.
Yeah. I guess the one point that I would just, at the risk of belaboring it, say is, my fear is when you have people, at best ineptly, handling this very important portfolio.
That would be the administration.
That would be the administration of Barack Obama, correct. And doing so in a way that invites perhaps miscalculation on the part of the whole, gaggle of enemies of Israel. You could find this translating once again, as historically it has happened when people miscalculate, a terrible war unleashed. But let me turn to another topic with you, Shoshana, because you're an expert in so many of these areas. One of the things that I have been struck by of late is this briefing that is attributed to General David Petraeus of the Central Command, our commander of CENTCOM, that has been represented in the press, though I understand there's been some backing and filling on this, but I'd love your assessment, especially given JINSA's excellent relationship with so many senior military figures, both serving and retired. What we should make of these reports that the Central Command has now been coming into Washington and presumably other capitals as well, saying, oh my gosh, if the United States doesn't force, in effect, they're saying, force Israel to make concessions and create a Palestinian state, we're going to lose all of these allies in the Middle East, and American troops in the region and beyond will be at greater risk. What's going on here, and how serious a problem is this new assessment of the threat?
Okay, again, you have to separate between real and code. The Gulf states, which is the constituency that CENTCOM reaches, always says to CENTCOM people, boy, we could be much better allies if you could just solve this Israel problem. It's the Israel problem that makes us unable to work with you. It's the Israel problem that underlies all the other problems. And they do this all the time. Yep. And the guys in the Americans in CENTCOM begin to think that there is, in fact, an Israel problem. That's code. That's code for, please don't make us take very, very important steps that might reduce our security here at home, that will destabilize us. Prove to us that you're going to be here and be our friend and be our ally. The real message from those guys is that they do see the United States as weak. They do see the United States as unwilling to take on the major issue of the region, which for them is, as it is for Israel, Iran.
Yeah.
So when they call us weak, they're not kidding. And when the CENTCOM guys come back here and say, the Arabs think we're weak, they're not kidding. The object of their unhappiness, however, is not Israel. The object of their unhappiness is Iran. If you want a really scary scenario, if you're a Saudi, remove the United States from the region and let the Iranians have a nuclear weapon and let the Iranians start proclaiming hegemony in the Gulf and stirring up Shiite trouble in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia. That's their nightmare.
Right. And they don't see us doing anything to help protect them against it, which
we're not.
Is the sign of weakness and can, again, lead to miscalculations across potentially a broad front. Shoshana Bryen, we're going to have to leave it there for today, but I do hope you'll come back to Secure Freedom Radio frequently. Your acumen on these subjects and the great work that you do at JINSA and the rest of your team, for that matter, is really, really prized by all of us. And I hope people will check out the resource that you represent. And what's the best website for that?
www.jinsa.org.
There we go, jinsa.org, JINSA.org. Shoshana Bryen, thank you. We will be talking with you again soon.